I'm so happy to be here today with you at Enspire 2021. Well, I'm really not so happy that I'm here and you're there and we're still here in our virtual Zoom boxes, but we decided that it would be best and safest not to rush back to an in-person meeting. There's still a lot of risk out there, your students and all of you as educators. We didn't want to rush back to in-person. It's been 20 months now since the pandemic started. We've all gotten really comfortable with online meetings. We might not love it, but we're getting pretty good at it. So thank you for answering our opening question. How are you today? How are you doing today? I saw a range of answers from excited, exhausted, inspired, and yeah, I think I'm feeling all of those things too. Let's face it, we're back in school, but we're not back to normal. Things are still really challenging, especially for you as you deal with schools, with building restrictions, student learning deficits, increased workloads, missing bus drivers, no substitute teachers, not to mention any challenges that you might have going on for you. So as we start this meeting and building this community of Inspire educators, learning and working together for this next week, I just want to say we get it, I get it, and we want you to know and we want to hear how you're doing. We'll be here to support you and hopefully inspire you with our speakers and workshops. But most importantly, we're going to stand alongside you and help you as fellow educators try to make your work a little bit easier. So a couple of reminders just about Zoom. Keep your microphone muted so that we can hear the presenters. Turn your camera on if possible. We'd love to see you. Use the Zoom chat for questions or comments. Participate as much as you can and check the Whova app for downloads and resources. We'll continue to post things there. For today's agenda, the main event is a panel presentation focused on improving student assessment. We're excited to welcome 4 presenters who bring a great deal of knowledge and experience to this topic. Following the panel presentation, we'll start sharing a little bit more information about the new Yippee Marketplace. But before we jump into the main event, we're going to start off with something new. We're calling it Mindset Minute. We're talking about the entrepreneurial mindset, of course. And here to lead the Mindset Minute is, for today and for our next week, is Scott Mann, Director of Education and Training at Venture Lab, one of our entrepreneurial education partners. Welcome, Scott.
Hey, Eileen, thanks for having me. And hey, friends, everybody out there. Scott Mann, Director of Education with Venture Lab, a fellow lifelong learner and former classroom teacher and out-of-school time educator. And as Eileen said, we're going to start this session off with our Mindset Minute, and I'll see you at the beginning of every session throughout the week and next week. So I hope you get to join us in all of those. So I want you to think back to a recent eye exam that you may have had, where you sit down in that kind of big, comfortable chair, they dim the lights, and they ask you to look at the poster at the end of the room. And then they swing that big machine around and start to click the lenses, and they say, is it better with 1 or 2? Is it better with 3 or 4? And those lenses serve to bring into focus the letters on the paper down there at the other end of the room. So I want us to think about entrepreneurial mindsets working in the same way. Each mindset is a lens that brings into focus different ways of thinking and acting so we can see opportunities and solve challenges and create value for others and for ourselves. So today we're going to be looking through the entrepreneurial mindset lens of empathy. Now, empathy is to think about other people's needs and feelings and keep these in mind when solving problems. You've got these cards in your swag bag, or we'll give you access to them on the Yippee platform later. So thinking about this empathy lens brought back to mind a student I worked with. His name was Sean, 8 years old. And during a brainstorming session, he shared how worried he was about his friend. And this is a direct quote from Sean. He said, "My friend's always getting into trouble. He walks around the classroom and talks to people without the teacher's permission. And when I ask him why, he says, oh, I'm just bored. And so I want to help him stay out of trouble." So Sean, being the empathetic and amazing individual that he is, proceeded to ideate and design the Transformer desk. So y'all, this desk is a functional school desk, but it also has a voice-activated assistant, padded seating, extra storage, And of course, it transforms into a jet who will then safely transport you to and from school. So I just want to pause for a minute and give Sean a round of applause for that amazing idea that he created for his friend. So good job, Sean. The empathy that Sean showed his friend to understand his needs to take action is what you do every single day when you're out there making a positive impact on the youth and the adults that you serve. You engage in that entrepreneurial and design thinking process, whether you know it or not, as you're empathizing, defining, ideating, creating solutions, and iterating them. So you're out there turning those constraints, so what's been happening in the past couple of years, into opportunities. You're showing up every day, creatively solving those challenges, keeping the needs and feelings of your students and coworkers in mind. So in the chat, I'm going to drop a link to an activity we call empathy coupons. You can use this with your staff, use this with your students, and those will be up on the Yippee store that Eileen was talking about. And throughout today's session, as you turn away from this computer screen and look back into the faces of your students, your colleagues, and your family, I want you to focus in your thoughts and actions through a lens of empathy, because you are an entrepreneur. Have a great session, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, Scott. I was going for empathy in my opening question as well. Blobby Blair, is there something that you have a hand raised? Can we get to you right now, or is that something for later? Okay, we're going to keep moving then. The Enspire conference is a partnership of Young Entrepreneur Institute and Burton D. Morgan Foundation. We are so fortunate to have the leadership, vision, and financial backing of the Morgan Foundation here in Northeast Ohio. Their support allows us to put together this annual event, which once again is completely free of charge for anyone who wants to attend. The Morgan Foundation has created an ecosystem in Northeast Ohio of entrepreneurs, colleges, K-12 schools, and education providers that's a model for others around the country and around the world. At YEI, we're grateful to call them our partners in this important work. And here today from the Morgan Foundation to welcome you and our panel of speakers is Program Officer Emily Bean.
Thank you for those kind words, Eileen. I'd also like to highlight the extraordinary impact that YEI has had on our region and nationwide. You are true collaborators in every sense of the word. You work in step with program providers and educators to ensure that students have ample opportunities to build their entrepreneurial skills. You provide so many valuable resources to the ecosystem, and you're constantly adapting and innovating to meet new needs. So I appreciate you and your team for not only exemplifying the entrepreneurial spirit, but instilling it in others as well. And with that said, I'd like to move on to the reason that we're all here today. This panel focuses on a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, which is improving student assessment. You will see that I started a message board about it on the Whova app, and I welcome you to contribute your ideas. We know that students in 2021 need skills that are beyond the traditional reading, math, and memorizing of historical facts. To succeed in a world that's continually changing, students must be able to think critically, collaborate with others, adapt to new information, and persevere after making mistakes. This type of learning demands a different type of assessment. And so for that reason, I'm so excited to introduce you to this panel of leading thinkers on this topic that will challenge the traditional approaches to assessment and present new alternatives that put students in control of their learning and that fuel student growth. Our panel of speakers includes Andy Calkins, who is the co-director of Next Gen Learning Challenges and a member of the Assessment for Learning project, Dr. Reshan Richards, who is a lecturer at Columbia University and also the founder and board chair of Explain Everything, Inc. Mike Flanagan, the CEO of Mastery Transcript Consortium. And our moderator today is Carla Jackson, head of middle school at Emmanuel Christian Academy, a doctoral candidate in organizational leadership, and a new school board member for Akron Public Schools. And leading off our discussion today is Andy Calkins. And so I turn it over to you, Andy.
Great. Thank you, Emily. Much appreciated. And hello, everyone. It's so good to see all these Clevelanders in the chat window. Although I'm talking to you from Gloucester, Massachusetts. I grew up in Cleveland. I have family members there. I'm a graduate of Cleveland Heights High School. I flew home to be there for Game 7 between the Indians and the Cubs. I can still sing all the words to The Best Things in Life Are Right Here in Cleveland. So those are all my Cleveland bona fides for you. Today, we're going to start off with a question. I want you to think first and then be ready to stick it in the chat window, but don't do that yet. The question is, there will be 2 questions. Just think of something that you're good at. It could be anything. Could be playing piano. It could be playing blackjack. It could be teaching middle school kids. It could be building an organization, playing tennis. Just fasten onto something you're good at and type it, but don't send it yet in the chat window. I'm doing that right now. And when I count from 5 down to 0, let's everybody hit send, and we will see a waterfall of response. All these things that we're good at. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Wow, look at all that. Making people laugh. That is a great one. Singing, jigsaw puzzles, napping. This is great. Okay, I really want to hear the answer from the napping person to the follow-up question. Now, thinking of the thing that you're good at, how did you come to know that you were getting better at it? How did you come to know that you would now say, I'm proficient at that, I'm good at it? Don't type anything in yet. Just try to concisely type something in there, up to 5 words maybe, that summarizes how you figured that out, that you were making progress, you were moving from novice to intermediate to advanced and so on. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. All right, let's just take 20 seconds now to just sort of scan up and down. I could identify edible mushrooms. People told me, feedback from others. I see results in the actions of my children, experience, successful results, practice, feedback, compliments from people, spreadsheets, playing the cello concerto of my dreams. So this is great. What you're seeing there, I mean, if we had time, we would have a whole conversation about this, and we'd go into breakout rooms and you'd talk about it. And what would emerge, as has emerged in the chat window, is this spectrum, of performance measurement design. And all of this, I mean, I haven't looked at every single response, but I don't think I saw bubble tests in here. I'm not sure I saw anybody respond with that. And not that they don't, have their place. Good. But as people, who have lived a certain number of years, we know something that for some reason, systems in public education have lost touch with. And that is that there is a full spectrum of ways that that we all understand that we're getting better, or that somebody in our care is getting better at something. You all know that. You're educators, almost all of you, and you do that every day. I'm sure if you're at this conference, you know that means you do. And so with that understanding, I'm going to take you into a project that our nonprofit Next Gen Learning Challenges, that's nextgenlearning.org, has produced over the course of this calendar year with support from a really generous foundation, the Leon Lowenstein Foundation. This is called the Full Spectrum of Evidence. And you'll see in the chat eventually URL, which is studentcenteredevidence.org. This was a follow-up project to an earlier one that we did, where we were asking all the schools and the districts that we had helped to catalyze that are somewhere in the midst of implementing and designing deeper student-centered, personalized, next-gen learning kinds of school models. You know, how are they measuring what they're doing? You know, they say they're all about literacy and numeracy, yes, but really all about the full spectrum of all the things that we care about that kids develop, you know, the whole child development and all those 21st century skills. How are they measuring that? And we got back this like blizzard of different kinds of efforts to measure student progress. That was great. But now 3 years later, we wanted to see if we could organize the blizzard a little bit. And that's what this project is. If you go to the site, what you'll see is this whole spectrum. When we started the project with the idea of a spectrum, a full spectrum, in part because, you know, this is one of those places in education where we do way too much polarity, either or kinds of thinking, you know, where we say it's all about the knowledge and other people say, no, it's all about the skills. And you know, we take away some of that to do that and you don't have any time for that anymore. Or, you know, it's all about, you know, tests that we have confidence in, or this other stuff that I don't understand and it probably doesn't hold water anyway. You know, no. It's all about the full spectrum, because there are purposes and roles for all of these forms of measurement. We just have grown up in, and we're still part of, a public education system that has landed really hard on the system-centered tests and has largely ignored, except in the hands and daily working lives of good teachers, the student-centered ones. And so on this site, what you'll find is a discussion of what this is, and then related conversations about why this is valid, and what it looks like in practice. So here's the right-hand side of that spectrum. It starts with learning environment surveys. Many of you are in schools that are doing this and surveying kids and really, you know, trying to listen that way to your students. But as it goes more to the end of the spectrum, it places students more and more and more in the sort of place of actually conceiving of and helping to manage their own performance measurement, you know, which is sort of the most advanced and meta version of all this. They're not just, you know, taking part in somebody else's assessment, they're framing the assessment themselves. There's big discussions of what all this looks like here in this site. There are tips for where to go. There are resources here for those of you who want to go deeper into things like performance-based assessment, resource banks, that sort of stuff. You'll see all of that here. For those of you who understand, as almost all of us do, the value and need for schools and educators and kids and parents, whole communities, to value the whole spectrum, including this side, and put it to work, there's a whole set of tools here for you to begin with and work with. One last thing, and then I'll turn it back over to you for some Q&A. This is the enabling conditions part of the site. This is full of you know, real world tools and ideas from the gang of about 10 schools that we cooked this site up with. They're all doing all of this all the time. They all say, this is the most important evidence that we gather. The data is important, but the data needs to be fleshed out and given meaning. And that's what this whole side of the spectrum is all about. So let me pause there and open it up for Q&A, and we're happy to go deeper into various parts of the site. I didn't even take you into the voices part. That's a whole gallery of student voices reflecting on their learning that I encourage you to go into and just start listening because they're pretty compelling. Great, Carla, thank you. Over to you.
No problem. No, thank you, Andy. While others are thinking of questions that they may want to ask, one of the questions that we'll offer up now, what are some suggestions that you can give to teachers as to how they may pivot from what they're doing now in order to improve their assessments? So going from more non-student centered assessments to assessments that are more student centered.
Yeah, honestly, there's a starting point here for those of you who are thinking, yeah, this is good, and I don't know that I'm doing that. I suspect you already are. Teachers who are reflective practitioners are using strategies from this website all the time. I'm just going to go back into it. And you may be conscious of that and recognize it, or possibly not. But just by starting by going into this website, my sister is a principal in the Washington, D.C. system. Principals have no time these days. But when we released this about a month ago, she called me and said, I saw your damn website, and I had 2 minutes to look at it, and an hour and a half later, I had gone down every rabbit hole in it, and I've sent it to all my teachers. And so the answer to your question, Carla, is start at the site, listen to the kids, think about the strategies that are described here, and then look across your own practices. And rather than sort of start something new, identify something that you're already doing that sounds like what's happening here, something that maybe you've even talked about with your colleagues, and deepen it, build on it. It's always easier and better and more productive to build on something that you're already starting to kind of pilot and use, and make it deeper and richer and better, and then talk about that with the rest of your school community, than it is to start something brand new. That would be my advice.
Thank you, Andy. And for sometimes as educators, especially those of us who are teaching, trying to infuse entrepreneurial education or financial literacy into our curriculum that is not standard, often the challenge becomes to truly know that you are using best practices, because you don't have any concrete measure per se. You can look at some things that maybe Nifty has compiled or other websites. But do you have any suggestions of things that just off the cuff that you may say you've seen to be a universal best practice when seeking to try to develop these assessments and instruct in a way that's more student-centered?
Yeah, I have two suggestions there. One is go to this part of the site. There's a really nice set of questions here that I don't think we apply to our testing and assessment strategies very, very much or very deeply. But these are good questions to ask about all of the ways that we are gathering evidence of student learning. Is this thing that we're doing here, is it deepening trust by the student, by me, the educator, by the community at large, by the student's parents, that the outcome of this evidence actually means something real, valid, and important? Does the evidence inform learning so that I can build on it with this student and help the child advance in a way that is now shaped by what we learned from that assessment? Isn't that a primary role of assessment? And does our evidence speak to shared values and aspirations? we all have a shared, aspiration for literacy and numeracy, but 90% of the testing that goes on in schools these days seems to be, seems to land in one or either of those two camps. And yet we are always then turning around and saying, yes, we care about the whole, the whole suite of whole child development. And so this is a practice that is suggested here on this site, that whole school communities begin applying these kinds of questions to all of the measurements that you're using, and you may come back with some surprising results. The other thing I'll suggest is that you go in here to these pull downs and just click through some of these resources, because they're a more practical answer to your question, Carla. This is a pretty carefully curated set of resources. And there's a lot of research behind them and a lot of really good, effective practice in the things that they recommend.
All right, well, again, thank you for that wealth of information as well as resources. Andy, I'm sure that many of the educators online will be able to utilize and take away some great strategies as well as information for what you have provided. And again, that information and those websites are provided within the chat. So make sure that you save those so that you may be able to glean insight for them at a later time. Now we'll hear from our next presenter, which is Mr. Reshan Richards.
Well, hello, and thank you. This is such a privilege to be able to spend this time with you virtually. Of course, it's always nice to be in person whenever we can, but I'm all the way here in Connecticut, and if many of you are a little bit further west than the East Coast of the US, well, this event allows us to be a little bit closer. I'm gonna share my screen in a moment, and I'm generally like so inspired by what Andy has shared, and then the work that Mike is going to share too. So often in the conversations around assessment, as educators, we feel like the things and practices that are in place or that are institutionalized, like something doesn't feel right, and then administrators and policymakers and who are in the position of power and authority to influence change or make change, they need evidence of what's an alternative. And I think that the work that Andy and Mike are doing, that you're going to hear about soon from Mike, helps to create that bank of evidence to help shift the conversation of just, instead of focusing on what's wrong with now, but also actually trying to have potential directions that people start to feel really, really good about and can start to shift that conversation. So it's so important. So thank you, Andy. I'm gonna, let me see if this works. I'm playing a little bit of a gamble here, because like one of my devices, it says 13% left. I think it's gonna make it. And then my laptop seems to have, it sounds like an airline that's about to take off. But I'm also sure that that's going to be fine as well. I grabbed this screenshot, Andy, from what you were sharing. I love these three questions. I mean, they're so centering around learning and around evidence and artifacts of learning that can be used to help shape educators' assessment of learners' development from early childhood all the way through professional and graduate school. These are such important questions. So as you can see, I care a lot about assessment. And one of the things that I felt as a student, as a learner, and then early in my career in teaching, was the ways that my own learning was measured and evaluated didn't seem representative of what I knew or what I was able to do with what I knew. And in my first several years of teaching, I was also feeling this almost sense of disempowerment, because the things I was being asked to do as a middle school math teacher didn't always feel great. That I felt that even though I was delivering curriculum and following kind of a set of program and expectations of what kinds of standards or goals my students were supposed to be reaching. I always felt that the instruments that I was expected to use and my teaching team was expected to use didn't always capture those things that, what a student knows and what they're able to do with what they know. So I tend to be a visual person, and I'm also kind of someone who likes to tinker. And so as I was asking this question and starting to actually think about the use of technology more in teaching and learning settings, just for a little bit of background, I'll do the short version of my timeline here. I was a music major actually as an undergrad, and I focused on composition. I'm a drummer by trade, and I became a math teacher as my first job. So kind of unqualified, but nonetheless, I was able to work at an independent school that took a flyer on somebody to be basically like an intern in the math department to teach 2 sections of 5th grade. But I was also at the time asked to assist with the technology department, helping with kind of tier 1 tech support and break fix types of things. And this is a little bit of luck. And even in the entrepreneurial world, sometimes you need a little bit of luck and serendipity for things to start to mesh. So I all of a sudden was operating very early in my career in teaching at this intersection of what I was doing in the classroom, but also separately what I was doing and just getting to understand computers and technology better. And eventually my graduate school path and then my future work path was to become a technology integrator. And I still continue to teach math. And I was still now really trying to tinker and test, like, what are the ways that technology can be used to help my students, again, show what they know and show what they're able to do with what they know. And I got introduced to, well, I was already using whiteboarding and digital whiteboards in my classroom at this time. And I got introduced to the process of screencasting, which is recording what's happening on your computer screen and recording your audio and then having those come together kind of in a video format. And some of you, especially, over these last 18 months, might have introduced creating instructional videos as part of your teaching toolkit. But this is, 15, 16 years ago. And the types of technology for creating these kinds of things were not necessarily as ubiquitous or readily available or affordable as they are these days. But I was very interested in having my students create these kinds of videos as I don't want to say alternate form of assessment, but almost as a confirming form of assessment, so that the types of things that I was required to provide to my students for them to demonstrate their understanding, I would still do those things, but I would look for other ways to really validate my own understanding, but their understanding as well. I'm going to compress this timeline here, but through this exploration and through, again, a bit of luck, in 2010 is when the first iPad was released by Apple. And I happened at this time to be starting to center my research agenda and what I was really interested in studying deeply in my doctoral work. And another kind of perfect intersection happened where I decided I was going to look at this form of whiteboard video making and screencasting on a newly emergent type of technology in the context of assessment, and not necessarily about like, did the students get it right or wrong, but I actually focused mostly on the teachers, and it all lined up. The decisions that folks were making with and without technology, or to do or not, was much less about the efficacy of the tools or even the quality of the instructional materials or anything like that, but much more about the belief systems that existed within the teachers who had the authority and agency to design instructional environments and to have students do certain things. So that's kind of a really wordy way of saying that when it came down to it, so much of what happened in the classroom was reflective of what the teachers believed or didn't believe about how people learn, how young people learn, and what are the best ways to measure that learning. And so I used this technological process as almost a lens to better kind of unpack and make those beliefs a little bit more visible. What ended up happening is that all of this work started to convalesce. Maybe that's not the right word. They all came together. And eventually, I have no background in business or even software development, but through a whole series of events of luck and running into good people and all of those things, and maybe a little bit of good planning, I ended up co-founding a software company called Explain Everything that makes a digital whiteboard that you can record and that hopefully that folks can use for a lot of different ways. So I almost had this bit of accidental entrepreneurship, but I think for those who have been teaching entrepreneurship, around entrepreneurship, or practicing entrepreneurs, that often the best ideas or products like start from a deeply felt connection to a problem or a challenge that folks are experiencing. And then really good decisions are really driven by this highly empathetic perspective, rather than saying like, I'm going to make something just because maybe there's a commercial opportunity or maybe there's a business opportunity, which is fine. It's okay to do good by doing good or do well by doing well. But often you can feel when people feel really closely connected to at least the primary challenge or concern that a product or service aims to solve. What I want to do before we kind of switch over to Q&A, I'm going to play a video. Actually, I have to make sure I didn't check the box to check my audio share. I'm going to reshare and make sure that's checked. But I'm going to play a little video here, and this came from one of my research projects. And it's a clip that comes from a middle school math class. And I have a little subtitle track because it's hard to hear because the student who's speaking speaks kind of faintly. But what you're going to be watching is a student-made whiteboard video where they're talking through how they approached a particular problem. And again, it's kind of a low-res audio and video, but I'll kind of do a little karaoke bouncing ball across the text here so you can try to follow along. And I hope that the sound will play to all of you. And if not, I will describe it. Maybe somebody can give me a thumbs up. Here we go.
Okay, so we have 2 blocks, and one is split into 4 pieces, and one is split into 5 pieces. Obviously, you can tell 4 pieces, 5 pieces. So now let's shade one of the 4 pieces in this first block. Ta-da! See? So now we're going to use the blue color to shade in 2 of the fifths. 1 out of the 5, 2 out of the 5. I would do a better job, but I can't. So now you can see that 2 of the fifths, if you put it up next to each other, there's more of this filled in than this.
So I'm going to pause it there. And whether it's in the chat, in the chat, I'll ask this question, see if anybody wants to share, like, for what you were able to hear or see, what are some things that you noticed from this student's artifact of learning, communicating? What they were doing is comparing fractions, which is bigger or not. And what did you notice? Thank you. Somebody just wrote confidence. She spoke confidently, quietly, but confidently. Talking through and showing the learning. Visual learner. Great use of visuals. Delight over feeling knowledgeable. Seemed like she had fun. Explaining in details. Perhaps also is applying and showing a technique, possibly taught by the teacher in that case. Can anybody hear the pencil sharpener going in the background? Maybe that was too subtle. A little bit of playfulness. Ta-da. Use some colors. And so, okay, great. So somebody just pointed out this is one of the main things, which is why I love this particular artifact as well. I don't know if you noticed this, and you could see it in the text here. So so she constructed her fraction sticks reasonably, right? Nobody could be expected to draw perfect rectangles. And when she was setting up, you probably noticed her subdividing it, right? That she cut the first fraction stick into 4, and she cut the next one into 5. But how many of you noticed, and you could see it in the text, what did she actually do to justify her response? And I'll tell you in 10 seconds, but give some, especially math teachers, maybe you caught on to this and maybe it was too quick. What she did in her explanation is she actually used this line as the way to justify that 2/5 was greater than 1/4. So on a typical assessment, she would have circled this and it would have read in a binary way, right or wrong, right. But her conceptual thinking about how she was justifying it was actually based on her own improportionally correct drawing. So she was actually using her own visual construction to now like justify a comparison, because actually this is showing that 2/4 equals 2/5. So that's great, and it's revealed and it's captured and it becomes this great conversation point. But what the most important thing from this kind of artifact is that the teacher cared. The teacher is the one who spotted it and said, this isn't a moment for right or wrong, but this is a moment for me to have a conversation with the student to help unpack and better understand a misconception so that the student would have a better and more consistent approach to an otherwise kind of very small sector of mathematical learning, but that might have some other ramifications for other things she was doing. So yes, the tool and the technology helped to bring some information to the surface, but it really depended on the teacher's understanding that like, this is valuable information. And I'm really curious about this ongoing, this like what I like to call qualitative formative approach to having this kind of information to help a student reflect and grow. And the student, most importantly, and this was kind of a subsequent study, that when students were engaged in this kind of process, they almost always like to hit play and listen back to themselves, which is kind of a weird thing. So like maybe there's a little bit of narcissism that, you know, anybody makes. You take a selfie, you look at it, you take a video, you look at it. But how amazing that just in an instant, you can have these kinds of reflective moments to hear back and see back the way that you were thinking about something. Not pretty, not polished, not perfect, but really raw and most important, immediate. Well, I'm gonna pause here for Q&A because there's so many directions that we can go. In the kind of digital handout materials, I've got all sorts of tangents that you can follow of stuff that I do, whether it's my work at Columbia, the stuff that I do my deep care about leadership and its intersection with technology, and of course my work with Explain Everything. But let me pause here for any kind of questions or things that I might be able to go into more deeply. And thank you, Carla, for emceeing here.
No problem. We were just checking to see if there were any questions. Very quickly, I'm interested in, because there's a lot here, but this specific book titled The Blending of Leadership. I wonder if when you talk about leading online and offline, right? How does that then apply or matriculate to a classroom teacher? Because I've always seen the classroom teacher as a leader. And sometimes it's hard for teachers to understand you are part of the leadership team and actually you're in the trenches. So your role is that of a general, more important than mine as an administrator. So I wonder, how could we properly communicate? Haven't read the book, just seen the title and I was like, it's a little interesting. I wonder how this would, because some teachers are very scared of technology. Students love technology. A lot of students love technology. So I just wonder, how can we maybe, if you can give us some insight with your knowledge, how a teacher can, infuse that in the classroom.
Well, thank you, Carla. So I'm going to give like two parts to the response. So the first one is, I am fully in agreement and alignment with you that, teachers are leaders. And in the same way, teachers are learners, and leaders are teachers, and leaders should be learners, right? That they're all overlapping. And it's that kind of mindset of that leading doesn't just mean telling people what to do, but leading means like helping people understand what needs to be done and help that move folks along and hopefully have a voice and a part in shaping those things that may need to be done. So that's part one. And so then definitely in this thought about like, well, blending, and this was written in like 2015 or 2016, And I think so much the foundation and like the perception societally and just kind of globally about like blending experiences, whether online, offline, same time, different times, all of that, like there's just a greater awareness of like the complexity, but also the range of choice that exists. And something that Andy talked about before, which connects to an exercise that I love to do with school leaders, is kind of like polarity mapping, where instead of really always being in an either or, should it be this or should it be that? Should it be standards driven or should it be student centered, teacher director? Like not everything has to be an either or. And so what this exercise could do is like, here's where you might say offline, right? Or no tech or low tech and online, right? So some tech involved. And then what you do is you kind of map out like what's great and what's not so great. And instead, and you try to take the perspective across all of these 4 quadrants. And then as a goal, as a leader, as a teacher, you try to find the things to really to identify, how do you focus on what exists up here so that you can get away from either or to both and. And leaders, teachers, you're the ones who are in position to figure out how do you construct those environments, those spaces that are people to call, that are called to, with that sensitivity, trying to leverage what's best of both environments while minimizing the not so great there. So, you know, one of the I'll try to post in the chat before this ends, but there's like a couple of like breadcrumb trails if this kind of thinking and mapping is interesting, but I find it really helpful to use. And you can do it for so many things like dogs or cats, right? You know, burgers or hot dogs, like whatever it might be, you can like really use this type of exercise to help drive empathy and really get folks aligned towards like the same goal. Like, how do we make the best? And of course, not everything is always going to have a nice both and solution, but it allows everybody's perspectives to be heard and considered. And I think that is so important to any kind of decision-making process, especially hard decision-making processes, when you do have to go, you can only go operate at one pole, and that you can't find that compromise, but it's a way to bring people along.
All right, thank you so much for that, Reshan. I appreciate that insight. And I think especially since we've all had to learn how to pivot and create proper learning environments as a result of COVID, that any strategies and things we can look to do is exceptional. So if you have any additional resources or anything, I guess we can look to the chat for those things. And again, we thank you so much for your insight and your time with us today. Next, we're going to hear from our next speaker, Mr. Mike Flanagan.
Greetings. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for sharing your time with us today. You know, I've been, like you, I've been kind of pleasantly overwhelmed by like the depth of content that we just saw. So I want to make sure I make really good use of my 8 minutes and focus on the stuff that matters. I will say, though, that because Andy shamelessly played the Cleveland hometown card, I am not a native Clevelander, but my son just moved to Cleveland to start college at Case Western. So Cleveland is now my favorite city. So I will play that card as well. So I want to talk a little bit about the work we're doing. Many years ago, decades ago, I was a high school English teacher. I taught English for a couple of years. And then I did a thing that hopefully will resonate with some of you who are interested in entrepreneurship, which is I left school and teaching and I went into technology and I started a company. And I've done a couple of those companies over the years. And I now find myself in a situation where I'm now coming back full circle. I actually am working with a nonprofit. It's called the Mastery Transcript Consortium. And we work with a network of schools across the country. And the best way to think about our work is to actually start where Emily started the discussion, right? If you're trying to teach learners to think critically and give them essential skills so that they're prepared for college, for career and life, what would you do in school to maximize the chances of that happening? How would school need to be different? Andy started by talking about resources and techniques for more holistic student-centered kinds of assessment. And that's vital. You need resources. Reshan talked about tools. You need different kinds of tools to support this kind of education and this kind of assessment. What we're working on is something different. And what I think it is permission. In order to do things differently, sometimes you need the permission to do them differently. And permission could also mean you need to get rid of obstacles. You need to get rid of things that are keeping you from doing those things differently. And so if I could leave you with like one sort of thought about what the Mastery Transcript Project is and what we're trying to do with it, it's this idea that we're trying to knock down obstacles for educators who are trying to rethink what school looks like, what we teach kids, and how we assess them. So now let me get really specific about that. So if I did my job right, you're going to see some slides. Can I get a thumbs up from anybody on the screen today? Yeah, thank you, Reshan. Okay, great. So what is the Mastery Transcript? What's the big idea here? This is not my slide. This is from an organization called America Succeeds. They're a really cool nonprofit. They have a great tagline. You guys will appreciate this. Great schools are good business. And they ask a pretty interesting question, which is, what kinds of skills do we want young adults to have when they leave school, whether it's high school or college, so they can be successful in the professional world? And the way they did it was pretty objectively. They ran a computer system to look at 1.8 million job descriptions that were posted on job message boards of all types, all different kinds of careers. And they ran a meta-analysis. And what you're seeing here are some of these 21st century skills that we say are important: collaboration, communication, critical thinking, and a lot of more granular ones underneath. So let's take that as sort of like challenge number one, okay? If we want to teach these things in school, how do we assess them? How do we give kids a credential that shows that they've actually learned these things? At the same time now, we're coming off of, we're in the middle of, unfortunately, the second year of this pandemic. And we realize now more than ever that, wow, you know, our kids are learning at completely different paces right now, right? Maybe it doesn't make sense to march them all forward on the same clock, right? We're going to move on to chapter 2 or unit 2. Is it because everyone's mastered chapter 1 and unit 1? No, it's because it's Tuesday. It's time to move on. Now more than ever, because of the pandemic, people are rethinking that. Maybe seat time isn't the best way to give credit. And then lastly, and we could do a virtual show of hands here. So I know that I, as a teacher, didn't get into teaching because I wanted to grade and sort children. I wanted to teach them. I wanted to help them learn. But unfortunately, too many of the models we have, the models that were on that system side that Andy showed you earlier, are really designed to rank and sort kids. And I know from talking to a lot of school leaders, and it's not because I'm in the classroom anymore, it's because I have the privilege of talking with a lot of school leaders. Many of them look at traditional grading as a necessary evil. And they say, you know what, assessment is great, feedback is great, helping kids learn is great, but the way we grade, the only reason we do it is because we have to. So one of the things we ask ourselves is, what if it wasn't necessary? Rather, what would you have to do to make it unnecessary? And it kind of looks something like this. The school leaders we work with, and maybe this is true in some of your schools, or maybe not your schools, your individual classrooms, these are the kinds of things that are getting them excited. Project-based learning, 21st century skills, interdisciplinary, self-directed. And I got to tell you, entrepreneurship is one of the best ways to do this, right? Design thinking, problem solving, working with projects, outside clients. I would say that of the schools that we work with, we are overrepresented in a good way for schools that are thinking about entrepreneurship and design thinking. The challenge is that the traditional transcript, and this is what my high school transcript looked like. I'm willing to wager it's what a lot of your high school transcripts look like because they kind of all work the same way. It literally doesn't have space for those durable skills that we were so excited about. It doesn't support personalized learning, progression based on mastery, because it gives credit based on seat time. Literally the credit hour, the Carnegie unit, is sort of the coin of the realm for the traditional transcript. And then lastly, it's completely wedded and anchored to traditional grades. And this is important because you need one of these if you want to go to college. And a lot of our kids want to go to college, and they should want that. So the question is, how do we give them the high schooling that we think they deserve, but also make it possible for them to go to college, even if the high school they went to maybe doesn't look like a traditional high school? And that's where we came in. We have this network of schools that is working together to build this mastery transcript. It's interactive, it's digital, it's competency-based. And most importantly, it includes evidence of student learning front and center. Students that are doing the kinds of work we want them to do, the work that we get excited about as educators, we want them to be able to take that work and put it front and center when it's time for them to do whatever is next. That could be apply to college, it could be to apply for a job, it could be an internship program. There's all kinds of different paths, post-secondary pathways that we think this can support. But we're working on this and we're pretty excited about it. And that's kind of it. The Mastery Transcript Consortium is a network of schools. We've got a group of school leaders who are interested in these learner-centered models. And we've built this tool that we at these school leaders can use. So our message, I guess, from the field is to sort of share with you that this is in fact possible, that you can actually move away from traditional grades and grading. Now, what if your school isn't ready to do this? What if you're not ready to do it at the systems level? This is where I want to share with you some of the resources that I put in there. And we're going to turn it right over for questions. One of these resources, there's an overview here and a link to an article about the mastery transcript, how we got started, what we're doing. I think it's pretty interesting. It was in the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago. But this is the real one. This is not mine. We are a part of a network of innovative schools and innovative thinkers who are thinking about this work. If you want to get an overview about competency-based education and a real nice set of links that are really kind of very clear, Eric Hudson, who's one of our friends from an organization called Global Online Academy, just created this amazing thread. You can click on it, you can follow it. It's an amazing set of stuff, perfectly curated. And then there's another group. Maybe you're part of this group already. If you're not, I cannot recommend enough joining this group called Teachers Going Gradeless. This is a movement, a grassroots movement of educators who are really interested in getting rid of or rethinking traditional grades. It's chock full of practical advice, how to get started. How can I, as a classroom teacher, minimize the harm of traditional grading, even if my school, my administration says, you got to do it. And so super concrete and super helpful. So I'm going to check myself there and see if there are questions from Carla or from the group.
Thank you, Mike. This was a jam-packed presentation with wonderful information. Basically how to equip and put our students on track for real world success. I think as educators, many of us find it very important that what they teach, how then can we apply? How can we then apply that in a way that it makes sense to the students, not just our application, but the students' application, because students become disengaged when they feel like, what does it matter? What is this for? How will I use this? I can count my money. I don't need to know physics or geometry. I can read the basics. I don't need to know. So when you start to think about assessments and things where students can use wherever they go, college or career, I think that's great. The question I was going to ask was based off of the gradeless assessments. We do know that there's research that shows some of our more prominent schools do not use letter grades and that students thrive. However, in our structured institutions, more specifically public schools, teachers will find themselves under contractual obligations and even from parents and other stakeholders if they make any mention of anything that seems so grassroots and new age. So I'm thankful for the resource that you added. I wonder if if a website or something for that could be added into the chat. But I'm also wondering if you have other suggestions to where of certain types of assessments or project-based things that teachers can do where they can equate maybe a grade to it, such as a passing is an A, or something like that, or a C, they kind of got it, to where they can still assess a grade to it, but it's more equitable for the student, if that makes sense. I'm sorry, I know that seemed wordy, but
No, I get where you're going. And I think the Teachers Going Gradeless group is an amazing resource because you have folks who, regardless of what academic discipline they're doing or what grade level, they're talking about real practical techniques. A couple of the moves that we see used most often is first, stop grading homework. Use homework, use feedback, but really make it formative. Give kids formative on what they're doing. Don't do the kind of rolling average. The other, and this is harder to do, and I don't pretend like to have mastered this myself because I'm not in a classroom anymore, but there seems to be widespread consensus that the power move here is really focus what you're grading on the academic work and not on the behaviors or the compliance. We need to decouple sort of behavior, what kids are doing, and then what they're actually learning. And there's a whole bunch of science behind that. Andy could go much deeper on that than I could. But I think that is the second one. And then I think the other one is trying to create assignments and environments where students are encouraged to take multiple tries at the material. One of the reasons project-based learning is such a great fit for this kind of work is that projects are iterative. No one expects the project to be right on the first try. And so if you're able to create space in your classroom for longer form work, as opposed to kind of strict unit-based progressions, That allows time and space for kids to take a step back, reassess, incorporate the feedback you're giving them, and then to try again. Because I think if we think about, we go full circle towards Andy's initial exercise, those things that we're confident and we're pretty good at, almost all of them took more than a single try to get right. The things that we are most proud of, we think we've learned the deepest, are almost certainly the result of like deep progression and repeated practice. To do something and to practice it repeatedly is to fail repeatedly. And it's kind of interesting because we don't usually create a lot of time and space to allow kids to try things and fail in our classrooms without immediate penalty, or systems that don't carry those penalties forward. So.
Great. Thank you again, Mike. One question that's been posed is, how can this type of transcript be used in connection with ACT and SAT scores when colleges review applicants?
Yeah, I didn't have time to throw the numbers on the thing, but one of the things we're most excited about is that we are piloting this transcript right now, and over 170 colleges have accepted kids using this transcript instead of a regular transcript. I cannot emphasize enough. Instead, not plus. We could create a colorful supplement that says, oh, here's your 21st century skills and your projects, but like we would never know if the kid got into college with that versus the real transcript with the grade. So we've totally like switched the two around. Now, on the question of standardized testing, we're kind of value neutral on that. We're sort of agnostic. Like, I think that if you have kids who test really well or test in profile for certain colleges, it might be to their advantage to take those standardized tests. I would like personally to see them have a lot less weight and urgency kind of in the admissions process. But we're kind of, we can only pick so many fights at once. And we're targeting the GPA. We're targeting kind of rolling averages. I do think that one of the things I talked about COVID earlier and sort of what that's done to the way we're rethinking seat time. I will tell you that it absolutely is dramatically affecting sort of how colleges are thinking about the SAT. So California, you've probably read, is kind of completely putting standardized testing on hold for the UC system. That's a massive change. And now we've got colleges with pretty much 2 good years of data for going completely test optional. And a lot of folks who would have assumed, oh, there's no way we could do college admissions without the SAT, are now kind of like, yeah, actually, we tried it. It wasn't that bad. We took more time. We had to actually read the kids' folders. We had to get a sense of what they were really like. And so there's openness now for us to talk about this. And I say us, all of us, to talk about this with colleges in a way that just wasn't true 3 years ago. So as terrible as the pandemic has been, that is like one small kind of silver lining that's created.
Okay, thank you, Mike. I too think that's great because I think standardized testing creates a sense of pressure and stress on young people that doesn't give us a proper snapshot really of their ability in all instances. Some students, they're going to perform well anyway. And then you have other students like what we're seeing now without these assessments, without the high school graduation test requirement because of the pandemic, and now 2 years into college that are faring very well. And so it makes us have to go with, how do we say, we have to rethink education. Totally. And I think it's been a long time coming. So thank you for the information that you shared. And hopefully our chat has been a little quiet with so many educators on. If this was a classroom, teachers would be going crazy. Is there anything that our educators or those who are with us today would like to share, or questions that they have for these wonderful presenters? Some great information. I know it's a lot of information that has been presented, but there are some great nuggets from each presenter. And maybe you just have a question that you would like to pose based off of experiences that you have had within your classroom in regards to instruction and challenges that you may want some insight from these individuals who have done the work and have compiled data for success. Anyone? Hello, hello.
There is a question, Vivian Williams.
Okay. Let's see. Ariana, could you?
I'll read it.
Yes, please.
Does
Thank
the
you.
new transcript showcase what areas the student may need assistance with when transitioning to college?
Yeah, that's definitely the goal. So if we think about sort of why do we think that measuring student progress using competencies is more useful as a tool for placement than traditional grades? I remember in my days as an English teacher, there's a lot of ways a kid could get a B+. right? Could be that they have difficulty kind of writing long essays and incorporating evidence. It could be that they're pretty good at that, but they just have trouble with spelling and grammar. It could be that they're really bad at time management. They just hand stuff in late. So you can have 3 students who have that B+ in English, and we have no data at all about what kind of supports or structures they need. So that's why unpacking some of these things to differentiate between the academic skills, that ability to write complex things with evidence, or the spelling and the grammar, or the time management, or the metacognition, or all the other kind of good behaviors we want in school, and treating them as their own discrete things. That's where the value is. That sort of, we would call it granularity of kind of feedback for placement purposes.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Mike. For our other presenters today, Andy, Reshan, are there any additional things that you would like to share with us as we wrap up about resources or anything that you feel you need to add?
Yeah, Mike, your answer to that good question prompted me to stick this link in the chat. Anybody out there who has not yet read The End of Average by Todd Rose, it's so readable. You will love it. It's sort of like Malcolm Gladwell-ish, all this great research, but wow, does it tell you the story of why we need to get to this end, the end of this idea that there is normal anything about human behavior. It's an artificial construct. Humans are jagged and context oriented in literally every way. And all of his research and the stories that he tells in this book will show you that. So totally recommend it.
I guess from my side, I know when the digital handout is accessible or available to you, a couple of messages have come my way, but there's the software that I was using when I was presenting was in fact Explain Everything. And there's instructions and a code for like an extended free trial. If you're interested, no, you don't have to do it, but just in case anybody likes free things that are temporary, there's instructions there if you wanted to poke around or play.
Okay. Thank you, Reshan. Okay, I see that Evan, your hand is up, and then Jacqueline Conway Scanlon.
Hi there. Yeah, it wouldn't let me unmute for a second, but we had one other question from John Carroll that I'm happy to read.
Yes.
What tools or methods might you recommend to create a student-led assessment system where the student does not find it a chore?
Yes, any of you guys can take a dive at that.
I'll take a first quick pass and then encourage Reshan and Andy to build on it. So
yes, please, Mike.
So for us, the moves that we think are like that we bake into the mastery process are what we would call like curation, reflection, and then choice. And so curation is basically taking the piece of work that you think is at the right level of doneness. Reflecting on it is thinking about it, writing about it, and then getting feedback from a teacher or an advisor. And then choice is like where you go next with it. Do you need to take another pass at it? Do you try something new? The thing that I really have to emphasize a lot, and this is where this is systems work, it's hard, is like, we don't want these things to be additive. These are the moves of what school should be. We want schools to look like this, because if you do them, then what you get is this set of artifacts or evidence of what students are doing, where the commentary from them and the teachers is already there. They didn't have to do it extra. It wasn't a project they had to do after the fact. It's what they did. And I think what you'll find is that those moves align really well to kinds of a lot of the moves you might be doing in other project-based scenarios, whether they're design thinking projects, whether they're entrepreneurship or creative problem solving projects, or even sort of more sophisticated group work and other kind of academic stuff. So again, I would just say those 3 moves of like curation, reflection, and choice is sort of what we're trying to go for.
And I'll just
go ahead, Andy.
Reshan. Yeah, no, you
please,
first.
please. Oh, okay. Well, thanks. I'll throw 3 words that I often use in a lot of work that I think are just good ingredients. So one is like the authenticity of task. 2, especially around the feedback, it's immediacy, which does not mean instant. but rather that like the point of feedback is close and proximate to that point of need. So like there's another two like rabbit holes to follow. One, is instruction at the point of need. And then the second one is assessment at the point of need. And so often in school, the way that just days are structured by the institution, that the timing of information communication, it's assuming that something is top of mind or top of emotional feeling at the point that that feedback occurs. So even if it's a student-led thing, the way for it to not feel a chore is that like there's this authenticity and there's this like correctly designed timing. And then of course, wherever you can find some like delight in kind of working through something challenging or difficult, and then having, again, this very intrinsic motivation for that satisfaction. I mean, a lot of times you see this in kind of like physical sport or things that have a lot of motion, like people will practice shooting free throws or putting or, doing things. And there's a huge amount of self-assessment happening, adjustment, calibration. And what's happening in that environment is that assessment's happening at the point of need. So often, even in video games and just gaming in general, there's again this very close connection between action and then informative assessment of like what's happening. So I think those are areas to look at.
So Reshan, thank you for pointing at video games, because when you look at video game design, it's basically an exercise in self-measurement. What are you doing? You're trying to get from level 1 to level 3 to level 5, and you are self-assessing, all the time. So some significant chunk of American kids out there are doing pretty complex versions of self-assessment, all the time. There's one more resource to recommend here. As you started talking about sports, that is a book by David Perkins at Project Zero called Making Learning Whole. In it, he uses baseball as the metaphor all the way through, as a way to talk about what he calls junior versions of really rich, complex work that all these kids are going to be doing once they, leave school. And many of them are doing outside of school as students. And how, in a junior version of baseball, you are practicing, you're going to take 100 grounders at third base, and think hard about how you're doing that all the time, because you're practicing for, the real version of the adult game of professional baseball. It's the same for everything that almost all of us point back to and say that was the most valuable thing of our high school years, drama club or whatever it was. It's because it was a junior version that was a really rich task of things that we found meaning in. So that book, once again, is Making Learning Whole by David Perkins.
Thank you, Andy. I appreciate that. Jacqueline, if you have something to add or a question you were going to read, please.
Okay. Oh, good. I am on. All right. I had the advantage for 2 years to stay under the radar at my public school here in Shaker Heights, Ohio. Don't tell. But I didn't have to report grades for 2 years. And it was lovely. The kids came. I taught 800 kids. I teach design, 5th and 6th grade. One of the units was engineering with empathy. And I put them in wheelchairs. I put them in crutches. I had them walk with a walker. And they had to figure out what they could design for those products or for another thing. One of the kids made an armband for his inhaler for running club. But not once did a kid ask me about grades, because they were so engaged and so into it that it didn't even come up. And some of the kids, there were always, out of 800, there's always a couple kids who I was astonished weren't interested or weren't thinking. And so they usually worked with somebody else and they got on board and they understood it, or they thought, oh yeah, my grandpa, one girl designed a sensor for medicine. Her grandpa, she was completely non-engaged in the beginning. And then she was like, well, we don't know when my grandpa takes his medicine. Maybe I could design something that when he swallows it, we could show up on an app and we would know that he swallowed his medicine that morning because he lives alone. And so I'm a big fan of the no grading. I grade now. I still use the same rubrics that I used then. Nothing really is different except for my reporting. I used to not have to report. Now I have to, fill out the progress book forms and yada, yada, yada. But I loved it. It was 2 years of bliss of kids just coming in to make new iterations of their projects, build something out of cardboard, do game design one unit. So just, it was easier to tell you that than write it. I hope that's okay.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Jacqueline, because it takes us all to that point of the excitement of learning. Learning is great. It's amazing when innovation can happen, because it's like the light comes on, and it's nothing like seeing the light turn on, the light of a learner's soul, where they know that they believe that they're able to, because it not only births hope, but significance. It makes them want to engage. So no, thank you for sharing. As an educator, I'm inspired by just you sharing that. So thank you for that. And very quickly, we did have some questions that came in. I think this one was for Andy. Someone, Linda, asked authenticity, immediate, and what was the last word? Was that your statement or was that someone else?
Oh, that might have been me, but it looks like somebody got the last one, which was delight.
Okay, cool. All right. And then the next one is, it's kind of more of a statement, and I think some of you may be able to see it in the chat, but not. So I'll share it because maybe you can give some insight in the chat. Kia says that Kia Grant states that she feels isolated when it comes to where students should or could be experiencing. She says that she needs a model from a public school setting that's similar to hers, because they have overcome some similar barriers, I'm thinking, that she experienced. I guess my question would be, what type of barriers, in order to answer that, we would have to know, what is that? What are those barriers? What does that look like? And maybe that's something you can add in the chat. I don't know if this is something that later could be added to an email to Eileen, and Eileen can send out. So, because that's something that need to be unpacked a little more. Andy has added something in the chat as well. Andy has added a website in the chat that may help you as well, Kia.
Kia, that website is a 5-year-long project that worked with and funded 45 or so different schools and school districts with partners to do exactly the kinds of things we're talking about here, and really rethink and reimagine assessment so that it could support whole child student learning. So you'll see lots of examples there, and hopefully clicking around the site, you could find a school or district that's sort of a similar story to yours. And through Carla or the other organizers, they welcome you coming to find me, and maybe I could connect you with that school.
All right, thank you so much, Andy. And again, thank you to all our presenters. What a wealth of knowledge. Thank you to the Young Entrepreneur Institute and the Burt Morgan Foundation. What a wonderful platform for us as educators to take part in, and to just glean so much insight and wisdom for those who have already done the work. How great is it when we can glean from those who have already done the work and address similar problems to ours. So if there's no other questions, I believe that I'll turn it back over to Eileen.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'd like to just share my thanks as well. And perhaps it's always so awkward to have clapping, but we do have the Zoom reactions. But a huge thank you to Dr. Reshan Richards, Mike Flanagan, Andy Calkins, and Carla for mastering being the moderator for our session. So thank you so much to them. It seems like my reflections here are that there are a lot of really relevant and important topics raised here that are worth digging deeper into. So I'll take some ownership of that. We'll continue the discussion on assessment in our work here at Young Entrepreneur Institute. We'll continue to share resources in our professional development sessions, our monthly power hours, in our resources that we share in our newsletters. We'll continue to promote the resources that we have gathered here from this conference. So we'll continue to do our part, and it really has provoked a lot of like stirred up a lot of thinking in me, the failure and the empathy and just some of those other entrepreneurial mindset characteristics that we're always wanting to help build in the students that we teach. So we are going to take a short break. We have just one other short thing to come back to on talking about Yippee, but I think it's time for a short break. We'll take 5 minutes, and we're going to have a dance break and a restroom break. So I'll let you decide in what order you want to do those. But Seth, if we can jump to the dance break first, let's do a time check. It's 5:15. Let's come back at 5:20. Okay, welcome back. I'm here with Emily Bean from the Morgan Foundation. Emily, are you ready?
Eileen, it's time. We told everyone that we are launching at Enspire. So let's get the show started. Roll the video.
Let's go to the videotape.
There's nothing like a yippee. In fact, when we thought of this idea back in January, we became ultra aware of just how unique it was and how needed it was. I don't want to bore you with all the details yet. For now, I'll just say that this platform was conceived to disrupt the philanthropic field by putting educators in charge of what gets funded. Instead of us deciding what we think you'll like, you get to pick. Instead of us hoarding all of the amazing insight given to us by educators, you get to learn directly from your peers. Granted, not all of the functionality is built out yet, but our vision is bigger than our stomachs.
That's right. We like the idea, but we wanted to make sure that you as educators would find it valuable. So we started asking, what's wrong with the current way that teachers look for entrepreneurship education resources? What we heard is that you don't have an easy time knowing where to find entrepreneurship education products for your class. You ask in Facebook groups, you search on Google. That's not an easy way. It's also hard to know which products will work best with students. Another problem you told us is that it's expensive. Educators don't have a budget for entrepreneurship curriculum. And again, we thought we can do this better.
So now, after 9 months of research and planning, we're thrilled to introduce Yippee, the go-to marketplace for all things in entrepreneurship education. So what is Yippee?
Yippee is an online marketplace that connects educators to a host of free entrepreneurial education resources and one another. It's a live marketplace. It's open 24/7 for searches and for shopping. It's filled with entrepreneurship education products. Once educators join Yippee, they can shop using points. What does Yippee stand for?
Y is for youth. We are here to support teachers of K through 12 students. I is for ideas, the heart of entrepreneurship. P is for products, what you buy and use with your students. P is also for points, the currency used to buy products. E is for entrepreneurs, how we want our students to act. And the last E is for exchange, the power that comes from sharing knowledge and ideas with your peers. So what makes Yippee unique?
Like our former mini grant program, Yippie's filled with lots of entrepreneurship education resources from lots of different providers. It's not just one company promoting its own stuff. And like I said earlier, the market is filled with education products that will be available to educators 24/7, all year round. And similar to other online shopping websites like Amazon, educators can provide reviews and feedback, so you can shop for things after reading the ratings and reviews. Products that have good reviews will rise to the top of your search list. Your reviews and feedback will make Yippee a better marketplace. So how does Yippee work?
For the educator, it's as easy as 1, 2, 3. Earn points, shop for products, which can be everything from field trips to speakers to hands-on learning opportunities, and then share what worked for you.
Let's look at each of these a little closer. First, educators earn points. Just by attending Enspire and by registering for Yippee, you will earn enough points to purchase your first product right away. Then you can search on Yippee for products that fit the grade you teach and the time that you have available. Check your online wallet to see your points balance, and then select a product to buy with your points. Finally, you can share your feedback so that other educators can learn from your experience. Then by using the Yippee website, letting us know about your experiences by liking and by favoriting a product, you'll earn even more points to get even more products.
And providers have a similar easy experience, but tailored a little differently. Providers open up a storefront and feature products at different price points. All of the products on Yippee help students develop the entrepreneurial skills listed here. Skills such as critical thinking, adaptability, and grit. Skills that help them succeed in life and navigate an uncertain future. And funders are the engine that keeps Yippee working. The more money we can raise, the more products become available to you. So what does Yippee look like on the inside?
Yippee storefronts will provide you with general information about the company, about the organization, their mission, and what they sell. Here's an example from one of our partners, Upcycle Parts Shop. You can see on the top a picture of what they do, some background information, where they're located, how many products are in their store, contact information, and their social links. You can also look at the product right below. So classroom set of innovation kits, that's available for 250 points, a description, what grades it's designed for. That's what a storefront will look like.
So when can we get started?
It opens on Saturday. In the meantime, follow Yippee on social media. We have Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're at yippee.exchange on Facebook. We're yippee_exchange on Twitter and yippee.exchange on Instagram. It's exciting. I think they're ready.
Yippee!